Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 4 wildcard first draft, right? This is probably going to come as a surprise, but I think if you watch the transfer plans video, we were kind of walking through how I would manage my team in a situation where Cunha was dealing with an injury, suspected to be a hamstring tear, or at least some sort of sprain, right? So unfortunately, the news has come out this morning specifically that Sar himself has a grade 2 hamstring strain or tear, and that is 4 to 8 weeks out. In fact, Salah had the same injury when he came back from AFCON the last time round, and he was out for a month, right? So most of the sample size, most of the understood learnings on this sort of injury is that it is 4 to 8 weeks out. And that's just terrible for Sar. I also had Cunha, who probably has a similar, hopefully better injury, but most likely this is a similar one. When I look at my team from, let's say, Game Week 3, it's not a great situation to be in, right? Because that forces me to play Murillo. It would have also forced me to play Estev. And actually, I think this is a week where I might as well just pull the wild card. Yes, I was planning a wildcard 13, but this is also a case of revisiting sunk cost fallacy, right? If you have 2 injuries in your team and they're very detrimental. So for example, what did I want to do in a realistic situation where I didn't have injuries this week? Let's say I had Cunha and he was totally fine. Let's say I had Sar and he was totally fine. I would have just done Romero to Munoz this week, and I would have had one of the Palace players that I want on top of another Palace player. Existingly, he would have been a very key attacker. But we've heard news about a Jeremy Pino injury too. So he's been recalled from the Spanish camp, and it doesn't seem like he'll maybe, be that involved in Game Week 4 for minutes. There's other Palace players that I could reasonably get to in the midfield, but no one that interesting. And I think the issue is, yes, there's players that I can bring in the short term that would actually work out quite well. Like, for example, Cunha can be a Liverpool midfielder, but at the same time, that's another transfer used. I would still have to play, for example, someone like Murillo this week. And I'm just not really looking forward to what the team almost is putting out in this week, where I think there's so many good games to game upon. Not even necessarily just the Liverpool game, but triple Palace, right? Which I've now lost completely all avenues to get towards double Palace, or even have one Palace reasonably within the team. It's also a good opportunity to now, of course, if I do wildcard, to revisit that Watkins spot in my team and what else that could be, for example, within FPL squad, and then to just address, unfortunately, the 2 midfield injuries, right? We've also talked about Porro and Romero. I mean, there's so many good value picks now. Even Murillo has been disappointing, I think, especially more so because of the playstyle shift of Nottingham Forest, right? With the possession piece that we talked about. So I've decided ultimately to pull the wild card. Yes, I think a lot of people intuitively say you go for a -4 in the previous week, and that's trying to set you up long term, and now you're wild carding. Does that make any sense? And the reality is, no, it doesn't make any sense, but that's because that's what injuries prompt you to do in FPL. You almost have to revisit the structure and the frame of your team, because the way that I was trying to set my team up for Game Week 4 before I had those injuries to, let's say, players who I was expecting to play, let's say, in Game Week 4, like a Cunha and a Sar, wasn't exactly like this, right? Part of the Gyökeres move as well was to move away from a Strand Larsen, who's now injured as well. And as we can read the reporting from the sort of Norwegian national team camp, he's also pulled out from training for the national team ahead of their World Cup qualifying games because he's also out for injury. So that's prompted me to wildcard. I've decided to activate as well because I think this is a good time to just simply lock into price rises, right? I've already missed a lot of them, and that's fair, but there's still players that I will probably think will go up in price and that actually can land in my team in the near future. So that's what I've done with the Game Week 4 wildcard draft. And if we start with defense, I think this is a position where you actually want to start considering more Arsenal, more Liverpool. You've gotten rid of some of the bad Liverpool games. You've also gotten rid of some of the poor Arsenal games, even though they've done exceedingly well. Like, even, for example, within the Liverpool game, I mean, Arsenal were very unfortunate to not keep a clean sheet there, and they've just looked very consistent. So the way that I'm approaching this is simply by going for Raya and then choosing one between Virgil, Van Dijk, and Gabriel within the defense. I will talk about a chip strategy piece in a moment, but I think in terms of defense, you want to be thinking about teams like, let's say, Liverpool and Arsenal, because that's kind of like the ceiling defender, I would say. And then we also have a lot of good 5.5 picks, right? Tarkowski, who has really still been racking up the DEFCONs. Munoz, for example, who has shown that he can step into the sort of DEFCON tier. He got that versus Aston Villa. Equally, he hasn't actually got an attacking return so far this season, except for, let's say, the assist, I think, in Game Week 2. But you're expecting for more from Munoz going forwards, right? And I think the key thing with Munoz on this specific week is we saw when Sar was subbed off, and especially if they don't have many players who can play in attacking positions. I mean, is it not possible that someone like Munoz could actually play, like a right attacking 10 type position, like he did, for example, at the end of the match versus Aston Villa when they were playing with 10 men, right? Which is a very different circumstance. It was 10 versus 11. I don't actually expect that to happen, but it's possible. So I'm going to go with Munoz for sure on a wildcard like this. And it gives you the opportunity, especially with Sarr being out now, to sort of think about what is the best triple Palace triple up. And I think that Lacroix is definitely going to be there. This is someone who actually should have gotten into the defensive contributions 3 weeks in a row. He was very unfortunate because the way that, let's say, FPL did their sort of points calibration is that they only give 1 hour to sort of readjust their points. They didn't adjust the defensive contributions of Lacroix, and he actually got 10 as opposed to 9. So very unfortunate for owners last week. But, you know, he just seems so impressive in that aspect. Senesi is another one of those players. So is Anderson. So I'm just moving into all of those players, right? These are players that I think are both solid in terms of defense. Like we've already seen the Bournemouth new look defense a couple times. Sure, they conceded 4 goals to Liverpool, but I think you can also just simply look at that game and just consider that it was still high quality finishing from Liverpool in that match. They didn't actually concede as much expected goals compared to, let's say, the 4 goals that they conceded. And then in matches after that, you know, it's been impressive generally. Some of the baseline numbers for Bournemouth have been really good, and that Spurs game is just blown me out of the water in a sense too. I mean, Spurs, I think, had one reasonable shot within that match, didn't have a shot in the first half, and you're looking at Senesi and thinking that he can get DEFCONs close to every other match. So far, he's got in all 3, I think. But yeah, that's how impressive Senesi is, and he still has that sort of attacking threat as well. So Senesi's in the team for now. I think he's just an amazing piece where you would never feel bad about, let's say, shifting into a structure, let's say playing a 4-4-2 now with defenders like Senesi and Anderson. So that's going to be my defense. In the midfield, this is a position where I think, once again, with Palmer not really certain to play good minutes in Game Week 4, I don't have the comfort and the confidence to put Palmer into my draft. So what I've actually done instead is I've actually gone for Semenyo. And it doesn't probably make too much sense for Semenyo because we've lost the Wolves at home game. But actually, when you look at the Bournemouth fixtures, I just think they're actually very above average, if I can put it like that, right? Semenyo has gotten 4 price rises, so a lot of people will easily just come away with the conclusion that he has no value or that he's escaped, I guess, his original value. But I think what I see Semenyo in this draft here is a placeholder for Palmer, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well, because I think that's sort of the main consideration at this point in time for why I want to go for Semenyo over some of the other picks within the game. I think there's really, really good value midfield picks, especially below 6.5 million. And that even starts from someone like, let's say, NJ, who is at 6.5 million and below. But equally, I think you're always going to have placeholders in your team. Like, for example, a Watkins right now is a placeholder. I've just decided to get rid of Watkins in the interim. I still feel very confident in terms of some of the midfield picks that I've already bought into so far. Like, for example, Tahani Reinders. City haven't been too impressive, but his minutes have been impressive. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of injuries around the City camp where I think that at his price point, I still think he's generally worth it. As I've always been saying, this is basically just looking at if you want to own, let's say, a Bernardo plus Gundo, and maybe also just consider that he's a bit more attacking than Bernardo is, right? Considering, let's say, the AC Milan underlying numbers. And so I don't really mind owning Reinders within the team. I own him at 5.6 million, so that's a little bit of a sweet spot within my own personal team context. And then I will definitely go for Paqueta. There was uncertainty around whether he was going to move away from West Ham. That's now been cleared up, clearly with the celebration as well that he actually, pulled off on the weekend. But he is basically baby Bruno within a midfield context, right? This is a player who's on penalties, more than capable of getting 12 defensive contributions within a match. We've actually seen him hit, for example, 11, and then we've also seen him exceed the threshold, for example, in the previous match versus Nottingham Forest. He's also someone who's actually quite good, generally speaking, in terms of chance creation, in terms of winning those sort of duels, which will help you rack up with the bonus whenever you, let's say, have the chance to score. Now, I'm not expecting him to be as good an open play attacker as, for example, maybe potentially, let's say, some of the Brighton attacking midfielders. But at the same time, that's not really all the roots of points to FPL, right? So that's why I've gone for Paqueta here. I'm keeping Bruno in the team. I just think he's very solid for all those bases, very much like Paqueta. And once again, it's a case of, if I was to, let's say, choose, let's say, a midfielder now or a forward, I'd probably choose a midfielder in most of these cases if they can get so many routes towards points. And even with some of the injuries that they have in the short term, like this could still be Bruno playing, for example, left mid 10 or Lamb versus Man City, which I think is a huge plus. And I've gone for Semenyo, as I said, as a placeholder, and Salah, unfortunately, I think is a lock in Game Week 4 wildcard. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who have different opinions on Salah so far. Like, I posted a question within Twitter, which was actually asking, how would you approach a Game Week 4 wildcard draft? Would you go with Salah? Would you go with Holland? Would you go both? Would you go neither? And a lot of the responses were very mixed, but actually I think a lot of people have been leaning towards going for both. I do still think, though, when you look at captaincies, you can probably just survive with one or the other. So my default opinion is always going to be you can probably just go for one or the other. And because there's an absence of a lot of high value picks in the game, like let's say Palmer's gone, Saka's gone, I still don't really quite see the value of a Nomium at this present point in time. In the future, we'll see, for example, that Palmer is most likely going to be a potential captaincy option on Game Week 9. Bruno, for example, is a good captaincy option in Game Week 7 when he has Sunderland at home. These are the kind of things that we want to think about. I think if you go for one or the other, that's the choice that you're going to make. I personally would like to make the decision that I'm going for Salah. And I'd also like to lock in, at this point in time, also a bench boost strategy, right? So the reason why I'm going with a little bit more of a deep team is because I'm trying to focus on bench boost 5 and then maybe moving out of that deep team a little bit later. And that's the structure that I've gone with. So as I said, I'm going with Salah here. He's the obvious captaincy for this week, so we don't even really need to discuss that, but that's going to be Salah within the draft. And then in the forward line, I've actually gone with Mateta and Gyökeres. A lot of people would probably be looking at, let's say, an Evan Nilsson at this point in time, who's just, once again, very much like Semenyo, a really good slow burn, in the sense that you can't really go wrong with this pick. I think the Bournemouth still looks like almost what we expected Aston Villa to be with good fixtures, right? Like Bournemouth are a team that have basically proven that within most contexts, except for, let's say, I think the end of last season when they succumbed to a lot of injuries and were just performing really poorly. Keep in mind, they don't really have European games. That I think the big pro here is that they've been able to sort of replenish a lot of the players who have left the team. And then you still have these big hitters in Semenyo and Evan Nilsson who can't really go wrong because I don't think that they're outrageously overpriced. So you have a slow burn type of pick like Evan Nilsson. At the same time, you have João Pedro, who I think a lot of people are immediately looking at as, buy. And I get that. One of the things that I'll say, though, is that if I'm committing towards a free at 6 strategy, I think I take away one of the big games that Chelsea have. I think what are the best games that they have coming up? Game Week 9, as I mentioned, Sunderland at home, another opportunity for them. But then Game Week 4 is going to be Brentford away, which actually looks like a really good game, given how Brentford have given so many of the teams that they've played against so far so many good opportunities, and they actually look like a pretty poor defense, which is what we talked about actually within the summit, right? I actually thought that they would actually be worse off in terms of attack. I think the midfield's probably still struggling from a defensive point of view, and fair enough, that's probably had an impact on that team as well. So yeah, that's a Brentford away game. That's really good. I think United away isn't necessarily good, but let's be honest, even Burnley were able to get so many chances versus United. I'll give João Pedro as many chances in the world as he wants. But he still has Chelsea, for example, Game Week 7. Nottingham Forest away is a pretty mediocre game. I would be free hitting on 6, so I'm kind of discounting that from the whole fixture run. At that point in time, I don't think necessarily I would like to have João Pedro within my team. If you want to have João Pedro in your team, that's totally fine. I suggested him, for example, in last week's Wildcard Draft, and I think he did really well. I think, in fact, the last week's Wildcard Draft, generally speaking, did really well. But yeah, that's kind of the issue that we find ourselves with, where I think that I'd like to go with Thiago as my third forward. And Thiago has benefited, right? Wissa has just left the club. Before Wissa even left the club, he played 3 90s in a row. Do Brentford look pretty poor? Yes. But Shadi missed a penalty, and that probably sends Thiago back onto taking penalties. He was able to score a goal, which is promising, right? A lot of people had questions about him in open play. At least he's done that once now in the Premier League. And compared to, let's say a Fulkrug, for example, or some of the other picks within the game, like Fulkrug could very easily lose minutes to Callum Wilson, especially after Callum Wilson's cameo was very, very lively. And then when you look at Richarlison, for example, now you've got Kolo Muani, a lot of scope for rotation in the future, things like that. I just would like to go with Thiago, especially with the Strand Larson news potentially meaning that he could miss out in Game Week 4. I just think Thiago is a very, very robust pick. You can't really go wrong now that you're telling me, if you're telling me basically Thiago is going to play 90 minutes every single match, I don't think you can go wrong with the pick whatsoever. So that's why I'm going with Thiago at this point in time. And that's basically the core of the draft as it stands. That's it. Dubravka as well as the bench goalkeeper. And let's just quickly see how we line up in terms of Game Week 4. So ironically, in Game Week 4, I think the trickiest thing to do with this draft is actually figuring out who I should bench as my 11th player, and who I should bench as my first bench, and who I should start within the 11, right? I think let's go through the guaranteed starters. It's actually going to be Raya. Then in let's say defense, we just go with Virgil, Munoz, Lacroix. In the midfield, I'll go with Salah, Semenyo, Bruno, Paqueta. And then in the front line, I'm definitely going Mateta and Gyökeres. The question here is, do I play Paqueta? Do I play Reinders? Or do I play Anderson? I think right now I'm going to play Anderson and bench Reinders, which is why you can see the draft is structured as a 4-4-2. But I can see Anderson, Paqueta, and Reinders. I can see arguments either way, right? Like Reinders, it's almost buying into, let's say, United playing really poor in defense. Do we buy into that? Is that going to be a long-term trend? Is City also going to step up a little bit in terms of the offense, right? Outside of the amount of chances that Haaland is getting himself. Thiago, I don't think I would play. Senesi, it's a good game, but let's be honest, all my defenders have better games. There's no way I'm playing Senesi here, but I'm sure he can get defensive contribution points in this match. I think I would like to hope that Brighton could be able to score versus them. So that's going to be the team as it stands, right? Playing Anderson versus Leeds at home, benching Reinders. But as I said, I think I could swap them around. I could play Reinders over Anderson. I could even be, incentivized to just play Reinders over Paqueta. But always playing the penalty taker is sort of like an emotional choice that I generally like tilting towards. So that's what I'm going to do with this team. In terms of captaincy, I think it's very easily Salah and a vice captaincy on Gyökeres. Let's actually jump into some discussion points around the draft, right? So a lot of people are going to immediately ask me the question of why aren't you going for someone like Gakpo? Why aren't you going for someone like Wirtz? What about Ekitike? What about Isak? I personally think that now, with Isak joining this Liverpool team and him going to get some consistent minutes for the Swedish national team as well over the break, unless he gets injured, right? Which will obviously change this draft. But if he's fine, if he's fit and he comes back to this Liverpool team, I think the question mark for me is still, does Ekitike get a lot of minutes? Does Gakpo get a lot of minutes? How do they all coexist with each other in terms of Isak coming to the team? We've already seen Slot talk about how Ekitike can move towards the left. I think that is unfortunately going to be a long-term move that hurts Gakpo. Now within this draft structure as well, I think the issue that I've created for myself is, I've used a lot of my free transfers recently. I do need to start rolling. Missing out on Liverpool is something that I'm willing to do this week, especially since I have so many other good players that I'm happy to keep. Like even Bruno, for example, is much worse than, let's say, a Liverpool mid this week. But long term, of course, he's the pick that I would much rather have than, for example, a Wirtz or a Gakpo who's going to have reduced minutes. So that's sort of my argument in terms of approach towards, let's say, not having triple Liverpool and not having, let's say, a second Liverpool attacker. I also would still like to give the benefit of the doubt to Salah, right? Because we can see clearly that this Liverpool team has not clicked whatsoever. They created, I think, the least amount of chances that they have done, I think, since the Jurgen Klopp era as well, in terms of open play expected goals, right? So Sobo, even his free kick chance was, let's say, a 0.01 type of expected goal opportunity, maybe a little bit higher. But you kind of get the point. It's not like Liverpool's offense has looked amazing. And I guess the question mark that I'm saying is, do we not, or shouldn't we give Salah the benefit of the doubt where if they have the opportunity to click, does Salah benefit a little bit more? He's still playing advanced. You can still make the argument that maybe he's playing out wide, which is, I think, a bit of a nonsense, right? Like he's always kind of played out wide. I don't think that's always ever been a problem. It's just also whether he, gets enough of the ball fed into him. Does he get enough chances? Are they, for example, still creating these opportunities in the second half where he's able to, as the last man in the team sometimes, benefit and also exploit? And I think he still can do that, right? Unless we want to say Salah's washed. I'm just prepared to not say that. I also think, end of the day, if I'm free hitting on 6, I don't necessarily need to rush towards Haaland. I'm going to miss out on Haaland for the next 2 weeks, but I'll always take these 2 Salah fixtures over Haaland. And that's that. As far as why I'm not, say, going for the Semenyo structure, I think when you look at Semenyo and Mateta, I think the nice and convenient move in the future is, if I think Gyökeres is a long-term hold, which I do, and I think Thiago is a long-term hold, which I do, then Semenyo and Mateta in the future can always be Palmer plus a 4.4 mid, right, with 0.1 in the bank, as it presently stands with the current market price of all these players. Like Palmer, I don't see him necessarily dropping again in the future, but it's possible that, let's say, if he doesn't, do well in game week 4, or if he only cameos for that match, that he could drop in price, right? Because people are going to be quite reactive to those sells. So I could very easily see that Semenyo can also keep rising. Like he still has good fixtures, right? I said that they have average fixtures, but he still has games on the run, like Brighton at home, Newcastle home. These are home games, which are huge. Leeds away, which is nice, Fulham at home, etc. So they're all quite above average, I'd say, but it's not like they're astoundingly good. Nothing of the ilk of, let's say, Wolves at home, for example, but good enough for, I think, Semenyo to do well over this run. And then the whole point of this team is that I'm committing also towards a chip strategy, right? I'm going for Wildcard 4, a bench boost 5, and free hit 6. Wildcard 4, look, I didn't plan to do a Wildcard 4. As I said, I was planning to do a Wildcard 13. But I think sometimes when you look at how bad your team is for a specific individual week and you lose so much of the value there, the first question to ask is actually, can you free hit, right, to paper over the value? But I think the big question is, by free hitting, I'm almost losing the value of, I guess, covering off, let's say, on paper, right, what would have been a good Gyökeres game, which I was buying into. Same with Sarr as well, because now I'll have to deal with Sarr versus Liverpool. I'll also have to deal with things like, for example, potentially what if Cunha and Sarr are both injured and they come out of game week 4 with a free hit and they're still struggling and they're still injured. That's something that I'm not really prepared to deal with, especially since if I don't have free hit 6 for game week 6, I probably would also want to actually use my 2 free transfers in the future to actually get out of Salah and go into Haaland, which means that I don't have the opportunity to really address too many other injuries within the squad. As I said, I think this has been prompted pretty much purely by injuries. I would have never wildcarded without, but that's the situation that I found myself in, and I don't want to sort of fall into the trap of, sunk cost fallacy. So that's it. This is going to be my wildcard draft. Thank you guys so much for watching, and best of luck to you all when you're wildcarding this week. I think it'll be interesting to actually kind of do a couple more segments. Like I'll also do a free at 4 segment, because I know other people might actually find themselves to be in a better spot to free at 4 than myself. But in the wildcard week this week, I think the other things that I find quite interesting at this moment in time would be things like, for example, considering what other midfielders you like to go for. Like I think the Brighton mids are still quite interesting. The Everton mids are still quite interesting. But what I've struggled with the Everton mids is, unfortunately, they don't really fit bench boost 5 too much. And I still kind of prefer Reinders for his price point compared to some of the other Everton mids. I know the other Everton mids have already outperformed Reinders in terms of some of the underlying stats, but that's a very small sample size. And they've also had some really good games to do that in, right? Like, for example, like the Wolves match, which obviously Reinders was able to feast in as well. So that's kind of what my thoughts are right now within the sort of overall context. I am pretty happy with this draft. I think as things stand right now, unless there's injuries over the international break, I can see myself pretty much being locked in 15 for 15 with this draft. And all I can say is I wish you the best of luck in drafting if you're also a Game Week 4 draft this week. Otherwise, take care and goodbye. I'll see you guys soon.